Okay, we are starting chapter 3, cells. In this chapter, we'll talk about cell structure. We'll talk about how things move into and out of the cell. So the cell is the basic unit of all living things. That means if you go any smaller than a cell, you talk about the mitochondria, ER, nucleus, etc. They alone, those organelles alone, are not living. But you put them all together and you get the cell. A cell must be able to carry on life processes such as response, reproduction, growth, and maintenance of homeostasis. So we'll talk about these terms again later. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the cell. So the first person to coin the term cells, was Robert Hooke in about 1665, and he cut some cork very, very thin, and when he looked in it, these little cells looked like rooms that the monks lived in, and so they lived in cells, and so he coined the term cells. The deal here was these cells were dead. Then Anton van Leeuwenhoek in 1675 was the first person to observe living cells in pond water, and so he called them wee beasties or animalcules. Matthias Leiden, a German botanist in about 1838, said that all plants were composed of cells. And then Theodor Schwann, a German zoologist, came up with the idea that all animals were composed of cells. And Rudolf Virchow said that cells come from living cells. And you may think, well, everybody knows that. Well, way back when, if a guy was traveling with his horse and a piece of horse mane fell into the water, and then he came back the next day and all of a sudden he saw a worm, he thought the horse hair became the worm. So people didn't always believe that cells come from other living cells. So from the work of these gentlemen, we have what we call the cell theory. So it is the work of Schleiden, Schwann, and Virchow, and the cell theory basically says this: all living things are composed of one or more cells. The cell is the basic unit of an organism. Cells can come only from other living cells through cell reproduction, and that is the cell theory. Now, the next topic about cells concerns with cell size. Cells are very, very small, and that is because small cells will function more efficiently than large cells. So if you think about it, if you have a small cell and you have a nucleus right here, and then you have a large cell and you have a nucleus right here, it doesn't take as long for nutrients or information to get to the center of a small cell. It would take longer in a large cell. So substances such as nutrients and gases can reach the center of a cell quicker in a small cell. So small cells will have a greater surface area, which is the outside edge, to a volume ratio than a large cell. So cell size is determined by surface area to volume ratio. Now, we can take all of the cells that we're going to discuss this year and we can put them into two main groups. We can either call them prokaryotic cells or eukaryotic cells. And so we're going to talk about general characteristics of each and compare them. And then we will get into more detail with eukaryotic cells in this chapter, and then we'll come back and talk about prokaryotic cells when we talk about bacteria. Okay, so a nucleus. Prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. They do not have a membrane-bound nucleus. Eukaryotic cells do have a membrane-bound nucleus. However, prokaryotic cells still have DNA. It is typically a singular strand located in the cytoplasm, and eukaryotic cells have DNA in multiple chromosomes found in the nucleus. Cell wall. Most prokaryotic cells have a cell wall of a compound called peptidoglycan. And then eukaryotic cells, it depends on who you're talking about. If you're talking about animal cells, which includes you and a goldfish, whatever, animals do not have a cell wall. Plants have a cell wall, and the molecule in the cell wall is cellulose. Fungus have a cell wall, and the molecule is chitin. So we mentioned these words in the last chapter when we talked about macromolecules. Cell membrane, or we probably really should call this the plasma membrane. which denotes the membrane around the outer edge of a cell. Both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells have a plasma membrane. Cytoplasm, which is the area where you find chemical reactions occurring in organelles. Both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells have cytoplasm. Ribosomes, both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells have ribosomes. Ribosomes are the little structures that make protein. They are not truly an organelle. Other organelles, prokaryotes do not have mitochondria, they do not have ER, they do not have Golgi, etc., whereas eukaryotic cells do. So keep in mind a ribosome is not a true organelle, it's just RNA and some proteins. Structure, prokaryotic cells tend to be simple and they are single-celled. Eukaryotic cells are complex. Some organisms are made up of single cells, but most are going to be most are multicellular. Examples of prokaryotic cells include bacteria, and then something we call blue-green algae. Some people call it blue-green bacteria. And then examples of eukaryotic cells are plants, animals, fungus, protist. Okay, that is as far as we're going to go on Chapter 3, and you can now do your homework part 1. Thank you.